Welcome to Lessons from a Podcaster, a show where we interview podcasters from all around the world and ask them to share their tips, insights, stories, and everything you need to know to grow your own podcast. This show is brought to you by PodSqueeze, the essential tool for any podcaster that wants to take their show to the next level. Let's get started with our host, Tiago.
Hello, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, Tiago. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Let's start with our pitch challenge. Try to introduce your podcast in about 30 seconds. Let's say someone approaches you in an elevator or in a party and they
Yeah.
ask you about your podcast. What do you say?
Okay, sure. So, my podcast is a Hungarian language movie podcast for movie enthusiasts where we review or analyze classic movies from Hollywood to Japan, to everywhere in the world. Uh, we spend 1 or 2 hours criticizing, analyzing each movie. Um, and we go into the depths of what cameras, what lenses are used, what was the technique that
Oh,
the
wow.
director chose for an important scene. We go through um, filmographies of famous directors like Martin Scorsese or Wong Kar-wai. So that's my pitch.
This is really, really cool. Do you have a movie background? Did you study that? Like, where does the interest come from?
Yeah, that's the thing that none of us have a movie background here. I have a co-host. We are doing this podcast I'm doing it with another guy. We are a two
Hmm.
host podcast. None of us have a movie background. None of us went to learn about movies in a school,
Right.
and that's basically that's part of our pitch that we are exploring and discovering movie making through this podcast. And our initial pitch was to cover our blind spots
Mm.
because we have so many classic movies that we haven't seen that we want to go through them week by week, and we want to learn why they are classics, what makes them a classic, and we try to be fans of each movie that we analyze. So that's why our podcast is named Vakfolt, which is in Hungarian means blind spot. So our podcast basically means blind spot podcast, where we
Right.
cover our blind spots.
Oh, that's really cool. I think podcasting is always a great excuse to learn something new, and
Yes,
you're
that's
definitely using that.
exactly right. That's exactly right. That's how I approach it as well.
Hmm. Do you remember your first episode? You started in 2016, so it's
2016. Yeah,
it's
it was
already
a
8 years ago. Do you still remember how it felt to release your first episode to the world?
it was really sweaty in terms of creating the podcast, which was yeah, it was kind of forced. It was not that natural as it is today or nowadays. And releasing it was, I never tried to set up too high expectations, so that was not the challenging part. Releasing it into the wild was not really challenging for us. I was like, well, if it finds an audience, cool. If it doesn't, maybe we are just doing it for 30 people, but those 30 people will really appreciate it, and I will I will be satisfied with
Yeah.
that as well. So I didn't really set up too high expectations in terms of releasing a podcast.
Do you remember how many listeners you had in your first 10 episodes?
Yeah, it was like 100 people.
100 people.
Yeah,
That's
something
still
like
not
that.
bad. That's good. It's a good start. How many listeners do you have now?
Now it's about 800 on average, but I think it goes even higher than that. It's like 900 or 1,000. Our most listened to episodes are like top lists and here and summary shows where we covered entire year. So those are listened to about 1,600 people even. But
Wow.
our audience is limited to Hungarian speaking movie lovers, so it's a niche podcast, I admit, but I'm satisfied with our numbers.
No, those numbers are amazing. And this just proves that in podcasting, you need to go niche. And I
Yeah,
love
I
that
agree.
you decided to go with Hungarian language, your language, instead of going for the mainstream English. So congrats on that.
Yeah, actually, this kind of podcast that we do, our pitch, our premise is, I think it's covered by a lot of English speaking podcasts. So
Hmm.
there's not really any place for us in that market. In Hungarian, we don't really have a competition uh, in terms of covering classic movies. And I agree that going for the niche works for us. I mean, we are probably never going to have advertisers on our show, but we do have a lot of supporters on Patreon and other
Wow,
places as well. So that really
that
works
is
out for
amazing.
us.
That is amazing. How much can you? I know this is not your full occupation, but you can monetize it a little bit. How much
Yes,
money do you
yes.
make from all these supporters?
It's not enough to make a living at all, but it can help in a tough when we have it. When I or my co-host have a tougher month.
Right.
Uh, then that can help a little bit. But what we usually do is we just use the money to buy equipment, uh, or subscribe to something like Zencaster or another tool
Right.
like
Mm.
PodSqueeze. And also sometimes we organize fan events using that
Wow,
money.
that's really fun. Okay, let's. That's a great bridge to our next question, which is, what is your tech stack? What do you use to go from idea to production?
Yeah, from idea to production, I use Notion to keep notes. So what I do
Okay.
is that I watch the movie, and I try to take notes during watching the movie. That's what I use as the basis for um, moderating the podcast. Sometimes we have guests, and I need to be the arbiter or the moderator of the whole thing.
Right.
So I use my notes to go topic by topic. And for recording the podcast, uh, we use Zencaster. We don't really use something to schedule the event because we just use Messenger for each of our hosts, or no, each of our guests. So we
Right.
don't really have to really pay too much attention to organizing to scheduling an event like this, like recording a podcast. But we
Mm-hmm.
send out the Zencaster link. We use Zencaster to record, and I personally use Zencaster to post produce the episode as well, because I
Okay.
do not really
Interesting.
have any knowledge of producing audio. But usually my co-host does the post production, and he prefers to use his own software. I think I can't remember the name of that software, but it's one of the most popular DAWs for
Mm.
producing
Yeah,
a podcast.
probably Logic Pro or something around that.
It's some starts with an R. I can't remember its name, but the
Okay.
letter R. Oh, okay,
Mm.
sorry. Maybe I'll remember it later. So we use that for post production, and then we upload the final audio to Libsyn, which is our audio host.
Okay.
It's not one of the cooler, newer host platforms, but I really appreciate the analytics, and I really appreciate that I can automate a lot of stuff because
Okay.
they publish to YouTube as well. I just have to
Oh, that's
upload.
great.
I just have to upload a 16:9 image to Libsyn, and they use that to generate the video, and that's done. So I don't have to use it, not another third-party tool for that, at least. So we do use YouTube and Spotify too. And what else is in our tech stack? I use PodSqueeze to analyze the audio. So at the same time when I upload to Libsyn, usually I upload to PodSqueeze as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not waiting for PodSqueeze to catch the audio from our RSS feed. I just
Yes.
directly upload it to
Mm-hmm.
PodSqueeze, and that way, by the time I finish post production, I'm finished posting everywhere. PodSqueeze finishes the analyzation of the audio, and I can use that to create Instagram shorts or Instagram posts um, and stuff like that. Mm,
Right. Do you use the video clip feature, or you just use the posts that are suggested by PodSqueeze?
Sometimes I use the posts suggested by PassQuiz. Sometimes I use the quotes to create my own videos.
Okay.
And yeah, I started to rely on the video clips generated by Pasquiz
That's great.
lately. But it's our language is Hungarian.
Yes.
I have experience with AI, text, analyzing text using AI, and it looks like it has a hard time really figuring out where the topic starts, where it ends, what are
Right.
the important parts of the text. It does a great job at figuring out what sounds important, but sometimes the end and the start of the clip is not really right. So I have to tweak it. I have to do it myself. So yeah,
Right.
actually, part of my tech stack is using FFmpeg
Yeah.
and some other
The
CLI
library,
tools.
the library for JavaScript and
Yeah, JavaScript library and using OpenAI sometimes to create a transcript. I use Figma to create the images for
right.
social networks or just create posts for Instagram. What else is in my tech stack? I have lots of stuff in my tech stack.
That's
I
a
have
very extensive tech stack, and
yeah yeah
I love that. Even though I know that it's not perfect, and Portuguese might work better for a language like English, I love the fact that we also have users
yes
speaking in Yuga,
I
and
yeah
it also works. That is
it,
really cool.
I consider it like an investment because I know this thing will improve. And
Right.
it's not going to
Yes.
improve in 10 years, but it's going to improve in 10 days probably because
Yes.
AI is developing so fast. So I have high hopes for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your tech stack with us. I think it's really good. It's very extensive. We can see that you put a lot of work into this,
Yeah.
and you probably produced already great episodes. Do you know or do you remember which one is the most memorable episode? Tell us a juicy story about one of your episodes. Something funny,
Okay.
something sad. Just tell us all about it.
I don't really have that so fascinating stories, but yeah, we do a yearly podcast around the Oscar season where we
Right.
create our own awards show, which is just a fictional award show where we create our own nominees and give out our own awards,
Oh, that's fun.
and it matches the uh, Oscar show in terms of categories and stuff like that.
Wow.
And we have a guest host for that as well. So it's a three people show. It's similar to for audiences who speak English. One of the most popular English speaking movie podcasts is Blank Check. So we basically copied that their similar episode, and yeah, that is also our most popular episode on a yearly basis. But one year, yeah, we both all three of us have our own style and our own like recurring bits and stuff like that.
Right.
And one
Script
of
jokes.
yeah,
Your
and
little private jokes.
yes, exactly. Yeah, and my go-to joke is that I sometimes add a fifth unhinged nominee, something that nobody expects, something that's really, really just insane. And 2 years ago, for the best supporting actor category, I listed like four absolutely undeniable great supporting actors, and for the fifth one, I just said Kenneth Branagh from Tenet, and our and our co-hosts lost their minds because that performance is insane.
Yeah.
And that's one of the moments in our podcast that our fans also go back, re-listen, and just
Yeah.
mention it for us time to time, that was one of the most unhinged moments in our podcast.
Do you get a lot of feedback from your fans?
Yeah, that's something that I really had to curate, and I had to pay attention to that a lot. So we created a Facebook group
Okay.
where our most dedicated fans are really active. I try to keep them engaged by creating polls, asking questions on a weekly basis, and it engages our listeners a lot. And yes, we do get feedback for each episode in terms of Facebook comments, and also in-person feedback a lot of the time.
There's a lot of work that you put into curating your community, right?
Yes,
What
I
are
think that's a
the
really important thing.
what are the techniques and ideas? So you post regularly. Do you connect with them 101? What advice would you give for someone that is also starting their pod, community around their
Yeah,
podcast?
yeah, I think the most important part is putting in the work. You
Right.
really have to do that, and you have to create. If you don't really use social media that much, you have to figure out your own online personality, a friendly presence that you can gather people around. You have to figure out what's the voice of your podcast.
Right.
When you post to Facebook or X or Threads or wherever, or Instagram, you have to use a consistent language. You have to, use the same tone for each post. And Facebook groups, or whatever channel is your preferred channel, it could be your WhatsApp or whatever group that you prefer. Telegram, some people use Telegram groups to to collect their fans into a group. Or Discord servers, which is also really popular for a lot of
Yeah.
podcasts. You should pay attention. You should go ahead and create that group or Discord server or whatever yourself, and you should make sure that the community remains active. So you shouldn't just post your weekly episode or whatever, and keep them updated that way. You should create posts that relate to your podcast, but are actually not produced by you. So I what I do as a movie podcast, I sometimes post a little behind the scenes image from an old movie featuring
Okay.
Arnold Schwarzenegger or something like that, a cool image where people create an alien for the Alien movie or something like that. So you should do that on a daily or somewhat regular basis. You should ask questions. What I do in
Like
Facebook
surveys and so
surveys.
on.
Yeah, what I do on Facebook is that I added some automation, and each week I ask my members what movies have they watched that week, and actually they post a lot of really
Oh, I
lengthy
can imagine.
comments. Yeah,
Hmm.
and we also do a yearly game where we it's like a March Madness, like in I think it's part of basketball. I'm not sure, maybe baseball. So we do a similar bracket using movies, and our fans have to vote every day. And at the end of the month, at the end of March, there's a winner, and then we watch that movie that won. And we create an actual in-person event. They have to buy tickets, uh,
Oh
and um,
wow. I
and we
love the
create
energy that you put into curating your community.
that's a
Do you
lot
think
of
this is
work, but
part
it
of
really
the
pays off.
success? Do you think this is part of the success behind your podcast, or do you have any other tips for someone that is growing their podcast, like how to grow a movie review podcast?
Yeah, I think you don't necessarily have to put all that energy into creating a podcast, because what my experience is that 80% of your listeners are going to be passive anyway. I mean, I listen to like 100 podcasts and I'm passive for 99 of them.
Yeah.
And, I'm an active fan of only one or two, which means I'm the active fan. I mean, I go to Reddit and post in that subreddit for that
Right.
podcast, or comment on a Facebook post and I add feedback to that host. So I'm really just active for one or two podcasts, and that's totally fine. You don't have to expect that your listeners will like your Facebook page, that they are going to join your Facebook group. You don't have to put too high expectations around that. But once you commit to creating a community, that really helps creating dedicated, loyal listeners, because you can
Yes.
listen to their feedback. Sometimes we actually invite some of our most engaged listeners to an episode. They can pitch a
Oh wow.
movie that we select, and we cover that as an episode. So yeah, it really can pay off, because you can organize in-person events. You won't make too much money from that, but you
Yeah.
can actually make some money. You can actually do live recordings, which can also be a great way to engage with your listeners. But first, you have to create an engaged core audience.
Yeah, and that's also the beauty of creating a podcast in your own language for people from your own country. It's so much easier for you to organize these events. Whereas if you do a podcast in English, your at least for my own podcast, my
Mhm.
listeners are scattered all around the world, so it's
Yeah,
it's much harder to organize event, at least an event in real life or in
that is
person.
true.
So I think this is great, and thank you so much, Peter, for sharing all of your knowledge. I think you inspired a lot of starting podcasters. So, Peter, if you could only give one advice to a podcaster that is just starting, also in the movie area,
Mhm,
or starting with their own language,
mhm.
what would that advice be?
It's hard to keep it to one advice, but let me try. So, if you're considering doing a podcast, you don't have to, be intimidated by the uh, money aspect of it. You don't have to pay for an expensive microphone. You don't have to pay for an expensive laptop. You don't have to pay for a lot of services to host your podcast. You can find a lot of tools online that have free tiers, so you can host your podcast for free, and you can use your built-in microphone in your laptop. You should probably use a laptop instead of your phone, but that's already a good beginning. And you can use online tools to create a post-production for free as well. Eventually you will probably have to pay for some of this stuff, and you will probably want to invest in a greater microphone. But as a start, it's going to be great. If your content is good, the audience will not care about that. And in terms of content, what you should focus on is being consistent in terms of schedule. You should, you know produce an episode on a regular basis. Your episodes should be similar in terms of length, and you should probably focus on, mentioning all your social media presence in your episodes. You should try and mention them in the first part of your episode, because most people don't listen to a long podcast. And you should mention and eventually you can create a Patreon, something like that, and you can also keep repeating that frequently in your podcast, and that will help bring or create an audience.
That is great advice. And I love the fact that you just mention and reiterate that there's no need to spend a lot of money. There's a lot of free, amazing tools. And now with AI, especially, you can do so many things so fast. So
That's
that's
so
great
true.
advice.
So true.
Great, Pete. Where can we find you? Like, just share your socials. Again, the name of your podcast. Where can we find you?
Of course, I'm on a lot of social media platforms. I use the username Freevo, Freevo. I'm on X or Twitter. I'm on Threads. I'm on Instagram. Uh, and my podcast is Vakfolt podcast.hu, or this is in Hungarian, but
Right.
vakfoltpodcast.hu. If you want to look it up, just look up one of my social media profiles, and you will find a link in my profile to my podcast. Um, or you can just Google my name, and that will also
Yeah.
turn up my podcast as well.
Amazing. I will link all of these in the show
Thank
notes
you.
of this episode. And thank you very much, Peter, for sharing your knowledge with
Thank
us.
you for the invite.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.